Hello, I'm Andree and you are welcome to Screencleaner, a current affairs, politics, media blather with recurring sound problems. Tonight I'll be looking at all that stuff and let's get to it. So earlier this week, US Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, with one congressman voting against the release. Clay Higgins was left with his hand fondling his balls through his pants, alone against 427 votes. While a policeman, Higgins was disciplined for beating a handcuffed black man, buying alcohol during SWAT operations, and using a police social media account to sell his own merch, patreon.com/Andy Luke. He blamed FBI infiltrators for the January 6th violence. The reason Higgins gave for voting against the Epstein Act was to protect the victims, despite it being bloody clear he has no conception of triggers, flashbacks, or any of the other damage abuse does, seeing that he caused his fair share of it. Clay Higgins will go down in history as a man who stood up for the cover-up. Meanwhile, the media, including you and I, could do a lot more for the survivors of abuse. What percentage of your Epstein comments include survivor strategies? I'm not playing holier than thou here. I think it's something that we all ought to keep in mind. So as regulars know, I like to poke behind the curtain of the production department to see who's setting the agenda in politics. So on political TV Roost is ITV's Peston. Now, as far as I knew, Peston was that kid off Nevermind the Buzzcocks.
The photo shoot was for the Daily Mail, which made me feel really posh and upmarket.
Oh, you put it in. I'll see you later. I can't
What?
Sorry.
Oh, no, Preston, come on.
I'm seriously going home.
Preston, we're having fun. Come on, Preston. Oh, no, we can't lose Preston.
Or, you know, something to do with this. But as it turns out, he bears more of a likeness to Pope's Jarvis Cocker. She came from Tufton Street with a thirst for knowledge, manuka honey, and a peerage from Boris. That's when I pointed at her eye. I said, pretend you're a performance artist. She just laughed and said she'd need a license. Well, I don't see anyone else howling. Try it out.
We did this very interesting story about a gambling company called Skybet. Do you think this is something that should be looked at? The thing I do want to ask you about is you, according to a readout from the Cabinet, made a very striking, you said something very striking about the digital ID card that you're working to try and introduce.
I mean, what I'm noticing about Peston is that he delivers a soft serve. He pretty much gives them a setup, doesn't push into the specific points, and gives them an out pretty easy. It gives them that credibility once they've passed his quite poor taste tests. Oh, Peston, do you recall that your argument was very small, with ministers in the hall gesticulating so very tall, you never noticed me at all? Peston, oh Peston, do you recall?
No, they didn't say why. They just, I mean, I'd hope, given that you're supposed to know everything about government.
I don't know everything.
But you're supposed to. I thought you were across every department.
That is a very convoluted way of, I think, trying to ask me again what might be in the budget.
No, it's not.
I think the idea
Pippa,
of someone...
am I asking what's in the budget?
No, absolutely not.
It was a very long question.
Unlike many of these characters in New Politics, he puts himself forward with exclamatory gestures, big noises, sounds. It's all performance art and it's crap. Robert Peston of The Peston Show has a dozen producers and it's hard to know where to start. Assistant producers Emily Wright and Emma Neely were brought aboard mid-2024 and early 2025 respectively. In Wright's case, she had served on the show for a couple of years, firstly as a production trainee, then as a researcher. Neely was a new appointment who had amassed senior researcher roles elsewhere. Fun fact, Emma Neely was a researcher on Ross Kemp, Britain and the Mafia. Oh, Ross and his wee hat. Angus Neil is a credited producer, graduating from St Andrews in 2022 with an English degree. He worked on ITV News for 2.5 years before his senior appointment to Peston in January 2025.
Will be voted out of the jungle, Labour's Becky Long-Bailey and the ex-Tory minister Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Take me now, Lord. Michael Clarke is Peston's political producer, formerly a researcher on the show. I couldn't find any more information on him, except that he set up GB News. It's clear to see his influence on the show.
And that people have been hearing stories that make them think that tax rates are going up. They heard that there might be an exit tax, and they're rearranging their affairs because the richest in society are extraordinarily mobile. You must remember that 1% of taxpayers are now paying 30% of income tax, and that
Jeez Louise.
that 1% is the most mobile 1%. So I think we are seeing a lot of well-to-do people leaving because of what has happened and what they are worried is going to happen, and they're getting their financial affairs in order early.
Would you ever...
You see, this is what Rees-Mogg does. He puts out a legitimately empathic, intelligent data, and then he wraps a lie inside it. He wraps a grift inside it. It's really good to go in to watching Rees-Mogg knowing that he's going to lie. He's going to sell the snake oil, and that prepares you for what comes next. Their appointments confirm a pattern we've seen from Question Time to Koenigsberg to Nolan. Firstly, the recruitment of youngsters, recent graduates to top production roles. It should be noted Neil, Wright, Neely and Clarkson all have career experience in news, if you count GB News, and politics. Secondly, the timing. Many roles have been filled in the last year, and it occurs to me that's in timing with the change in government.
Well, I'd have to leave Somerset, and that would be a frightful bore. I'm not. I mean, I worked in Hong Kong for a few years when I was young, but I'm not young anymore. Capital taxes are dreadful taxes. They have the greatest effect on economic activity for the lowest amount of revenue.
I can't even hunt pheasant
the government
anymore,
needs a certain amount of revenue.
Bears.
I accept that, but it gets it much more effectively
It's illegal to hunt
from
bears.
income
It's
taxes
ridiculous.
and value-added taxes, from sales taxes.
Peston has 2 executive producers as well as a production executive. At the beginning of her TV career in 2018, Joanne Austin was production executive for Peston on Sunday. Since then, her pedigree has largely been on entertainment pieces. This includes 25 episodes of Paul O'Grady's For the Love of Dogs, a show which ran for 12 series. As with Neely, she worked with Ross Kemp, in this case on a show about Belmarsh Prison.
While I can never know what it's truly like to be a prisoner.
Well, apart from the time you were married to Rebecca Brooks, that was a cheap joke. Brooks was arrested for an alleged assault on Kemp. At the time, her paper, The Sun, was running a campaign on domestic violence. And she was having an affair with Andy Coulson, who actually did spend 5 months in Belmarsh Prison. I imagine Austin and Kemp had a more fun time making that show than the subject matter would suggest.
Cheers, gents. Have a good evening.
You've been close to Donald Trump
Hacking
for
into
many
children's
years.
phones.
How?
The same happened. I had some of his administration on my show, uncensored, and they were saying, we're going to release all the
You have a
files.
television
Then we had this
show,
bizarre thing
Piers.
with Pam Bondi, the Attorney General,
it isn't
where all these
television, not
influencers
on
got
YouTube,
invited to
no.
go and see her. We don't know if there are going to be redactions. If there are, will that raise more conspiracy theories? So my answer is, I don't know what's happened here to take
Hang on,
well, we're going to reveal it.
You've known him, and you're...
The executive producers, not to be confused with the production executive, are Andrew Dagnall and Laura Wilshaw. Both have appeared on the career advertised hype train. This might not be so unusual for a producer, as the source is ITN bragging. Though, given they both wield vast power over ITV/ITN News, these stories may still fall into the category of vanity publishing. Donal has over 10 years clocked on senior news roles, before which he was at Computer, Magnify, before which he was part of the News of the World, the infamous Rupert Murdoch rag that hacked over 7,000 phones, including that of a murdered child during an active police investigation. Donal worked there during the publicised inquiry, so after Andy Coulson was editor, but while Rebecca Brooks was in charge. That's between her arrest on suspicion of conspiring to intercept communications and on suspicion of corruption allegations, but before her arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Andree Donal also worked for the Mirror. Speaking of which,
I would posit a theory that it's not Trump worrying about himself so much as potentially worrying about who those other people are. Are they friends of his? Are they business associates? We just don't know. But it's very strange. The reason I painted out the journey for people is...
And yesterday,
he does other things which I think are very effective by using the same blunt instrument technique. I would say, not as a defence, but as an explanation for why he is so rude to journalists in America, is that he has spent years being called a Nazi and a fascist by many of them, and I don't believe he's either a Nazi or a fascist. So I do think if you're going to get those...
More high-profile moves around the CV of Peston's executive producer, Laura Wilshaw. In Wilshaw's case, someone has worked a number of roles in TV production across 25 years. This includes respected stints as Sky's foreign news editor, current affairs vehicle Tonight, and as deputy editor for Channel 4 News, and 6 years with ITV.
Are you not at all concerned about us turning our backs? You have to look at what's going on in Sudan at the moment to be absolutely horrified at the atrocities that are being committed there. Should we really be just turning our back on such desperate people?
The numbers have simply got too large, and we cannot take any more people. We had, under the new figures from the ONS, nearly 950,000 people come in a single year.
Explain to them. Head of production, we're almost there. Head of production is Jane Smith. Smith has been in production management since 1987, shepherding such scourges of television as I Am a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, Hell's Kitchen, with noted homophobe and bully Gordon Ramsay, Gammon Spunk Factory, Celebrity Love Island, Paul O'Grady for The Love of Dogs. That was made by Multi-Story Media, an in-ITV production company of which Joanne Austin is part. Smith also worked on the acclaimed Martin Lewis Money Show, proving she's not 100% demon. Despite a producer being a senior role, there's usually a senior who's actually a senior. And this makes up another consistent factor in production teams.
Well, let me clarify, I don't actually say it's dead, but what has died...
Hang on.
I know. If you read the book, and I urge you to buy it. The premise of the book...
Frankly, there is no very clear consensus on what
exclamatory.
I think there are genuine questions around single-sex spaces for women, prisons and sport, for example. But I also think that trans people are some of the most vulnerable people out there who get way more abuse than pretty much every other or many other sections of society, and I think it's really important that they are also treated with respect and dignity.
I understand that. I absolutely respect trans people's right to exist.
Analysing what may be the most important budget since the 2008 financial crisis, because it'll determine not only whether the economy can be rehabilitated, but whether the Chancellor and Prime Minister can keep their jobs. Don't miss it. See you then. Bye-bye.
God, this completely escaped the continuity. Oh, look at all this mess. And so talk about more mess. Here's Big Madge of Big Madge Studios.
So in this segment, we're going to be discussing this clip and a bit more from someone who works at More in Common, which is a polling company in the UK. He's the director for them. So let's have a listen to what he's got to say.
Big part of the reason that the public so resoundingly booted out the Tories last year was a sense they had become addicted to chaos. The sense this government is the same is very, very dangerous to public perceptions of the government. They are exhausted with political drama. For lots of people, it does seem basically since 2016 and the referendum, it has been one thing after another.
So when we go back after the referendum, you had David Cameron resigned, stuck with Theresa May in Brexit hell, really, because of the deal she's trying to set up with the EU and her lack of majority that she sacrificed for no reason, really, apart from absolute stupidity. Then you had Boris Johnson. We know Boris Johnson during coronavirus and all of those things, absolute lunatic he was, the chaos of the lockdowns, the parties, all of that kind of stuff, right? And then you've got Liz Truss, who imploded the economy. And then you had Rishi Sunak, who was probably the most stable out of all of them, apart from his whole Rwanda scheme, which was a complete disaster.
But secondly, and I think more importantly, it gives this sense that politicians are focused on themselves rather than the cost of living, the NHS, tackling problems with immigration. You know, they're not focused on those issues, the public's priorities, rather they're engaged in internal dispute.
Which I can kind of see. It's kind of like, you know, if you think, you know, these politicians are not dealing with actual day-to-day issues, what are they doing all day then? You know, if they're not dealing with the problems in the NHS, are they just infighting all the time? Which I think is the case. You know, I think the public are fair to have that assessment. You have this person from he was polled in a focus group, or kind of questioned in a focus group, I guess, saying, quote, "The bit that resonated with me was stop the chaos. We've had so much chaos in the last 14 years. It's been awful. They just don't know what they are doing, and we've got to give someone else a chance," end quote. And that's why this person, I think, voted for Labour, was because Starmer offered to end the chaos. And so do you think this person will vote for Starmer again, given the situation that we're in? Those words came from Johannes, a pensioner from Portsmouth, during a focus group in May 2024. We've just shown a video of Keir Starmer's speech promising a kind of politics that treads lightly on our lives. And you can see that it's not been anywhere near as chaotic as kind of the Boris Johnson era or even the Liz Truss era. But I think it's probably been as chaotic as, I think, Rishi Sunak or even David Cameron. I think that'd be fair to say under Starmer. You know, infighting makes government seem self-indulgent. The PM, the Prime Minister, weak and focused on his own drama rather than concerned. You know, this is a guy who's looking out at potential challenges. That's what Starmer's problem is right now. And you know, this article from Bienkov where he talks about, you know, leadership talk misses the point that the government's biggest problem is not just a lack of leadership, but a lack of clear ideas about what a Labour government is actually for, which I think is a very fair criticism, given the fact that we don't really know much about the Labour Party, apart from the fact that suddenly now they want to copy Denmark's immigration policy, and every year Rachel Reeves comes back for more tax in tribute because she can't anticipate how big the budgetary black hole is. When you look at, you know, the economy, when you look at the polls, I would say the biggest factors are, of course, the economy and asylum, and then health. I personally think asylum's been way overinflated. But when you look at Starmer's stuff in the opinion polls, he's the you know, kind of the most of the public are dissatisfied with him. He's in record lows. And in a week where he tried to stab Wes Streeting, instead he got hit worse. They all think Keir is done. How the push to protect Starmer's job backfired spectacularly, and that's the week they've had. But anyways, that's me done for the week. I'll catch you guys next week, potentially. Bye-bye.
Some heavy stories ahead, so let's break it up with some general news, because that'll make us feel better. Controversy as Brit tabloid The Sun gave away the budget report as a 30-page pullout a week ahead of its official release. Double controversy. It's got tits on page 3, page 5, and pages 7 to 28. The free gift was not available to readers in Northern Ireland or the Channel Islands. They can get stuffed, the filthy Ubernuts. Trump fails in his attempt to Rohypnol Mamdani. Democratic Unionist Party gets hot about democracy and a capital U union. You could heat your phone this winter with a little Jim Allister. Just be sure to wear earmuffs. Badenoch hopeful at not having to resit primary school again. I'll sit at the big girls' table. Somewhere the news media appears to show some sort of effort is in covering the ramshackle organisation within energy companies. OVO, who supply 4 million customers, has been in the news this week, leaking word of several hundred redundancies. Last month, their CEO, David Buttress, stepped down. Buttress was Boris Johnson's short-lived cost of living czar, and he leaves behind a company scrambling desperately for $300 million for investors. To find out why, we'll go to the top and their relationship with corporate regulator Ofgem. With their thoughts on the 2021 Putin makes energy markets crash crisis, Ofgem put in place a ruling back in March. They introduced a capital buffer or buttress of cash or assets per customer. Industry news site Energy Live reported last week that OVO and largest supplier Octopus failed to meet the regulator's targets. Ofgem have given them more time, and what else could they do to maintain market stability? But reasonably, those who have complied with the regulator have called out the failure and the response failure. Because it's easy to see a clear route from this to OVO's making redundancies weeks before Christmas. And that's because those jobs losses were part of OVO's appeal to Ofgem to get them more time. Ofgem are there to regulate the companies. Though they work with the Energy Ombudsman, they are not consumer-facing. In September, Ofgem decided on applying a standing charge on domestic customers, which expert Martin Lewis said he had more complaints about than anything else in the energy market. It's a £300 poll tax type payment to use gas and electricity, politely framed as a minimum usage level. It's claimed to target second homeowners, but affecting the most vulnerable. Ben Hurst in the Manchester Evening News wrote, "Standing charges are applied daily, regardless of how much energy the customer uses." So you would think Ofgem's approval of extra income to OVO and Octopus would have helped them meet their targets. Add to that the rise of 2% on average household costs. Well, if squeezing, grifting, and sliding out of your responsibilities doesn't work, there's always crime. A few months ago, Anna Timms laid out 3 stories of pensioners wrongly charged hundreds and thousands of pounds by leading energy companies, and their response to course correct was legal threats and more charges. There are common motifs in energy companies' maltreatment of customers, and I'll start by correcting myself. Customers, no. Many of those contacted have never held accounts with the company in question, yet find themselves harassed. Reading these reports, OVO, Octopus, Scottish Power and others misidentify the people they contact and those residing in properties. There are many stories of people being phoned at their home, their place of work, while on palliative care awards, different phones, partners living 50 miles away being contacted, like some fucking banned YouTube account logging in under another. Just weird stalking. And it's not unusual for letters and calls to be automated and therefore ignored. And this is systemic of these companies' relationships with those they chase for money. Often when incorrect charges are brought up, perhaps with a solicitor's letter or an ombudsman's decision, a company might back off for a few months, only to resubmit the original fraudulent billing with penalties on top. It's not unusual for customers to be denied their rightful bills for seasons on end, only to be hit with a demand for a couple of grand all of a sudden, or a total lack of a bill, but a bailiff suddenly turns up at the door. When good journalists like Anna Timms get involved, energy corporates scramble to rectify the problem from embarrassment. This isn't just a story about the basic needs of warmth and lighting. No. Misbehaviour by leading energy companies, as we've seen, can be traced to fraud and psychological abuse. Consumer Voice reported back in May that some victims would be compensated, which maybe has reached them after many years of trauma. Expert Review's recent report on Scottish Power shows a high level of complaints and a sluggishness to deal with them. Meanwhile, Octopus are managing their crisis by offering customers cinema tickets and free sausage rolls. Somewhat more use is giving each of their customers over £100,000 worth of... Oh, sorry. It said free cash on the side of the machine. Octo Assist is a charity-like endeavour where customers can donate credits which Octopus will match in the fund. Vulnerable customers can then apply to a scheme, providing grants, personalised help, standing charge waivers, free electric blankets and more. All well and good, and a case of advertising literally jumping the shark. Overall, we're in talks with the Rothschilds for financial investment. I'm not being sneaky, they literally are. But that's a fat use to hundreds of ex-OVO employees unable to heat their homes over winter after Christmas. As part of their restructuring plan, they've also put a cap on taking on new customers, which will at least save others from sharing their fate. Now, you probably suspect I'm a godless, feckless layabout, but did you know my father was a preacher and his father before him? And look, I have a lot of respect for atheism as a system of thinking, but there's a humorlessness to atheists that just turns me off. A complete scientific lack of evidence around God's existence, which fails the test each time. Because the fundamental beliefs of religiosity in one God has done so much harm to our species, but atheism lacks a sense of play. There's a profound misunderstanding of humanity in that. Because with tens of thousands of gods, everywhere there's a church, there's a God. When we orgasm, we cry out for a God. Every time you see a Marvel movie, there's gods. Gods are in the blood of every person, wherever you live on this planet. Contentious thinking in Northern Ireland, where a new ruling has come into play regarding religious education. I don't know much about it. So I asked my Discworld podcast co-host, PJ Hart, to explain.
So, here's something kind of crazy that happened last week. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom made a ruling essentially stating that every single child educated in Northern Ireland since its inception in 1921 has had their human rights violated. The case is JR 87, UK SC 40, if you want to look it up. I'm going to quote from the Administrative Court blog here to run it down because they know more about court stuff, I guess, than I do. So on the 19th of November 2025, the Supreme Court handed down judgment in Re JR 87 2025 UK SC 40. This case involved an appeal and a cross appeal concerned the provision of religious education in Northern Ireland's school system. The question was whether the provision and the way that schools operated was compliant with the European Convention on Human Rights. The rights in question was education, Article 2, Protocol 1, read with the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion, Article 9. The Northern Ireland High Court granted a declaration that there was a breach of the ECHR. The Court of Appeal allowed the appeal and declared that the ECHR had not been breached. The Supreme Court allowed that appeal and restored the High Court's original declaration. So, how did we get here? Trying to explain anything about Northern Ireland to anyone not from here, or at least from the island of Ireland, is like trying to explain the lore behind Lord of the Rings or Warhammer 40,000. It's just so dense, and most people in the UK just frankly don't care. But back in 1921, when Ireland was partitioned and Northern Ireland was created, schooling was handled by the churches. In order for the government to take over education, deals were done. The Presbyterian, Anglican and Methodist churches, in this context they're known as the transferor churches, transferred their capital assets to the new Northern Ireland government in exchange for public funds and continued influence over the school curricula. These are the controlled schools. Schools run by the Catholic Church retained independent control over governance and the provision of education. As the court notes in their judgment, after partition of Ireland in 1921, the Catholic Church did not wish to avail itself of the opportunity of transferring their schools' capital assets to the state. If you know anything about how Catholics were treated in Northern Ireland, no big surprise there. So all that is to say that education here, especially primary school education, has been heavily influenced by Christian churches for as long as Northern Ireland has been a thing. The current religion core syllabus was drafted by the four main Christian churches in 1986 and specified by the Department of Education. It applies both to primary and post-primary schools, but the syllabus covers RE from foundation stage of primary 1 and 2 through key stage 4, which is pupils working towards their GCSEs, so like 15, 16-year-olds. As the BBC notes in their coverage of this story, at all stages the core syllabus is Christian focused. Again, if you know anything about Northern Ireland, it probably isn't much of a surprise to learn that we've all been subjugated to Christian indoctrination of one form or another for our entire lives. And honestly, it feels kind of amazing to have a powerful body like the Supreme Court recognise how messed up that is. The question is, what happens next? According to our DUP Education Minister, nothing. At least, not right now. So, you may know in the lore, the DUP are our local British Christian nationalists, so not much of a surprise there. And just to be clear, this isn't America, so the Supreme Court can't just chuck out primary legislation, as that would undermine the principle of parliamentary sovereignty on which our whole unwritten constitution is based. They can, however, declare secondary legislation invalid. My understanding, as a highly qualified film studies graduate, is that the core syllabus is a piece of secondary legislation and should immediately be declared invalid. But even if that doesn't happen, again, I'm no legal expert, I would leave you with this final thought. One of the provisions of the 1986 Education Act is that religious education in primary schools here is not subject to school inspection. In that case, if every controlled primary school were to stop teaching religion tomorrow, what exactly would the consequences be if no legal mechanism exists to enforce it? Just some food for thought for any of you NI teachers out there who are genuinely interested in respecting the human rights of the children under your care. Good night.
Thanks, PJ. That was great stuff. Praise sweet Jesus. So, Shabana Mahmood. It's no surprise Shabana Mahmood is part of the anti-Corbyn McSweeney Starmer alliance. She studied in Lincoln College, Oxford, 1 year below Rishi Sunak, and Mahmood became Labour's MP for Birmingham in 2010 alongside high-profile accusations of electoral fraud, which were cleared up nicely in a neat little bow. And Mahmood previously boycotted Israel as an illegal state, though since Hamas accelerated the war on some day or other, she made calculated moves to schmooze Jewish and Israel power players to curry their endorsement. As Secretary of Justice, she brought prison numbers down through the early release scheme. This included 37 who were ineligible, one committing another sexual offence within hours of release. The day after being appointed Home Secretary, Britain saw its first uncontrolled migration in 3 years. Almost 1,100 migrants arrived in Kent in one day, which Mahmood seems to have taken as a personal threat. 2 months later, she delivers a new paper aping the American home invasion and disappearance policy. It's been condemned by Amnesty International, Liberty, and so many others. But Mahmood has on her side Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who drives a Bentley, crashed a grooming gang trial, and definitely isn't a pedo himself. Mahmood's plan is explicitly a hatcheting of protections. The language used in her policy statement sounds a lot like a mafia shakedown. Leave to remain cut from 5 years to 30 months. Settled status increased from 5 years to 20 years, making sure leave to remain is remotely applicable. If a refugee jumps fast enough to get a work and study visa and pay a fee, there are vague protections. Family reunion is no longer a right, and an inquiry into whether the measly benefits are too much. The paper is calculated for median narrative potency. Asylum hotels rather than former hotels as housing asylum seekers, and stressing barracks and training grounds as replacements. Illegal working is used as a rationale to slip digital IDs through the back door. So Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, is in favour of digital IDs now. You'd think with his criminal record he'd steer clear. A section on removing failed asylum seekers is vague. There's gammon tough talk on penalties against countries who don't take the citizens that we tell them to. There's the invasion we've been promised so long. What's next? Flying bombers over their airspace? Parachuting migrants in? Maybe we could launch our own small boats with the SAS returning migrants, just like Dunkirk. Whatever the cost may be, we shall dump them on the beaches. We shall shove them on the landing grounds. There's also the creation of a new body to look at appeals against decisions on asylum. The appellant has one shot, and if they fail, they're out. There's explicit language to make your mother's hair turn blue to prevent migrants from making late human rights claims. We agree that people should never be subject to torture. However, there's the use of AI in age recognition. The language on safe routes is also vague. Where it isn't, it is to focus on strictness and repetition of the phrase capped route. The media have broadcast Farage's anti-migrant hate speech for a decade and a half. So what happened when their nasty wank climaxed? Screencleaner surveyed over 20 pieces of online print media for a whistle-stop tour content analysis. Strap in. Kate Wannell at the BBC equally divides word count into 4, Mahmood and Farage, and against 30-odd MPs and NGOs. Behind a seemingly oppositional header, Rajiv Sayal writes a puff piece extolling Mahmood's virtuousness, footnoting Labour peer Alf Dobbs' remark that she's using children as a weapon. Amanda Akis of Sky is much the same, profiling a lack of compassion as something to work up a masturbatory lather about. The Observer's Rachel Sylvester also makes Mahmood the main story rather than the policy, noting heading off a threat from reform. There's a graph of rejected asylum seekers most likely to leave in the Tory graph. Charles Hymas is supportive. Like other articles, a token mention of panicked racist policy. James Mools at Labour List pushes back the front-load voices, calling it dehumanising and racist echoing. Shipley at The Spectator acknowledges the media's role in the purge, but on celebratory terms, with vulgar, rectal, exploratory, political fetishisation. Chisholm and McGarvey at The Beeb bullet point Mahmood's paper, and the common paragraph through all of these, which is Conservative and Reform MPs have praised the move, but said it doesn't go far enough. The realisation that appeasing fascists doesn't pay might be the motive behind a multi-authored New Statesman piece. Here they quote 23 MPs using phrases like truly shameful, morally bankrupt, cruel, unfair and unworkable. A second Rajiv Sayal Guardian sucking off Mahmood piece. I see you, Sayal. Back to the Beeb and Jennifer McKiernan with another flattering puff piece, putting 5% of her chips on the idea that this might be a breach of human rights. Same header photo, author uncredited, wholly endorsing Mahmood's moves like Trump, who is a convicted sex offender. Oh, fuck. Rajiv Sayal again? Familiar narrative of Mahmood being hard done by. Because we're all out to get Mahmood, don't you see? Maybe co-author Jessica Elgo snuck in the line about charities fearing another Windrush scandal. A live blog without Sayal can't help but include the outpouring of revulsion from Corbyn, the SNP, the Greens, Labour MPs who aren't calling everyone anti-Semites. There's another Guardian Live from Andrew Sparrow. Haven't I seen that headline elsewhere? It does include Chris Philp's report of 10,000 illegal crossings since Mahmood's appointment. There's factual nuances, but it's worth it out of spite. Opinion by Zoe Williams. The jewellery thing isn't a joke, by the way. But Mahmood's a character, ain't she? A character. Whoa, what a character. The Guardian even gave Mahmood her own opinion piece in case we felt her voice wasn't being held. Behind the same Dark Forces headline, like George Lucas gone racist. Ian Watson soothing Mahmood with the Danish excuse. Chris Osa reports on devout Christians doubting the Big G's existence now, along with refugees from Hitler, and a charity leader calling it a governmental kneecapping. Before the story broke, Charles Hyman was paving the way with false equivalencies, and Ben Jennings at The Guardian suggesting nonsense is where this all ends, where it always has been. I was quite shocked by how much prejudice there is in this coverage. Subjecting myself to commentators like Owen Jones, No Justice MTG, Kevin Logan, Maximilian Robespierre, Dilly Blase and others, intelligent educators, I hadn't realised the extent of the lies and hatred being reproduced. My survey falls far short too. Most people get their news not by reading, but through mile-long plasma screens mounted to their walls. Legitimate websites may present a picture, but it's television and fake book face news which decides on how much fascism is swallowed. And just time for a quick roundup of other news this week. Some man who senior Reform UK figure Zia Yusuf has never heard of, who led the party's efforts in Wales, is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Here's Russian agent Nathan Gill photographed with Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, and Nigel Farage and Richard Tice. Reform UK have been rocked by departures, and not just temporal ones. Their choice for Croydon's mayoral candidate turned out to be dead, and is still dead at time of recording. Meanwhile, Farage's comments on Nathan Gill as loyal, honest and hard-working caused a continuity rupture and the loosening of yet another clone of Farage, perhaps a 400th, shaken loose from his timeline. Experts refer to the clone as a Farage time lie. Further time lies are expected next week as Farage is to deny Reform UK's link to Jeffrey Epstein and child brothel at Mar-a-Lago. Green Party leader Zach Polanski crushes opponent's skull with magical powers. COVID inquiry finds Boris Johnson's slow response caused 23,000 extra deaths. SARS-CoV-2 Boris variant mocked the report and said, "I will kill your parents, your children, cripple you for the rest of your life, and you can't take away my ex-PM's payments." One commentator observed, "Johnson and parties are forever linked. When he dies, a nation will celebrate." An update to PJ's story. Disgraced Education Minister Paul Given struggles with joined-up writing, but vows nativity plays will continue. And the DUP Minister for Policing, Trevor Clark, the man behind this MS Paint gaslighting, has given tacit approval to a huge police overtime spend. Reacting to the fresh scandal, Clark pretty much said, "It's no big deal. Move on. Let me get back to stirring up more hostility. I'm learning Photoshop, and when I corner those godless heathens, there's another huge overtime check to bash some sense into their big eggs." Bargain bin Stephen Nolan impersonator Graham Linehan found guilty of criminal damage. The court is yet to hear of his habitual use of toilets for disabled people occurring over 20 years. Being a cum-crust, gout-mouthed scumhead does not meet the legal definition of disability. And finally, an idiot stands in front of a door blocking other people coming and going with mindless cruelty. Zero conscious spatial awareness. Well, that's all I've got time for in this screen cleaner. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and I'd like to say thank you to all my contributors. And goodbye.